this session we're going to be looking at piping. So I'm going to show you how to pipe on the straight, on the curve, and on a corner. So the previous video I showed you how to make the piping and how to pipe on a straight, curve, and a corner. So this time the difference is that we'll be putting a piping cord into the bias binding. So making bias binding, pretend this piece of paper is fabric, so your warp is the length of the fabric with the selvage side, and your weft is going across. So these are your grain lines, cross grain, your up and down grain, and then the weft side here, meeting the warp there, and fold it across, and this diagonal line becomes your bias. So that gives your fabric stretch. So on the fabric, same thing, you're turning that corner down. You can see the bias of the fabric here. It's got give in it, it stretches. So you see those bias cut dresses? So if they're cut on that angle, they hug the body. So that's a reason for bias. It goes around the body nicely, and plus for bias binding, when you're going around on a garment with your piping and stuff like that, it will go around these curves more smoothly. So this is the piping on the edge of a bodice. So if I would have done that on the straight, it would have been all choppy and look like 50p piece, like flat choppy edges. So being on the bias gives you that smoothness of going around curves. So a quick way of cutting, you've got your fabric like this, you folded it down, and then you start cutting on that angle. So a quick way you can do it, because your fabric would be really wide, probably 120 up to 145, 150. If you fold it like this, the two corners in, like that, turn it this way, and you can start. I'm just going to use the width of the ruler. If you get a rotary blade, and decide how deep you want to cut it, and you keep doing that. And then you've got your strips, your bias strips. And when you join bias strips, you need to join them on the diagonal. So if you put them like this, pin them and then machine them with the small little hem, 1/4 inch hem will be fine. And then when you fold them up, you get this diagonal join. So once you've joined it on the diagonal, open up your seam allowance so it's the bulks distribute both sides. And it being on an angle, what that happens is when you wrap it around the piping or around the edge of something, it will distribute the bulk on an angle, so you can see it's across. And because if you joined it straight across like this, you get all the bulk in one area, concentrated in one area, and it'd just be a big lump. So it's better to join them on a diagonal. So piping on the straight. So if you're going to be piping along the edge of something, like on a bodice, so the bottom with, and you want to decorate it so you got like a nice cord, so it makes the edge look nice and finished. So how you do that is you get your bias binding strip. Remember, it's on the cross grain. And what I like to do is, for the edge on your bodice here, if you pre-fold the ends in and leave your cord sticking out, then you don't have to come back and finish it off. And if you fold your fabric around your cord, so it's like a shingle on a roof, so one side's shorter than the other. And then what I do, I hand tack it so it doesn't slip on you. And then once you've done that, you will come and, with your longer part of the bias binding laying on top, if you pin it in place on the edge, and then you would come along and with a zipper foot on your machine, with your zipper foot on the machine, you will stitch pushing against the edge of the piping cord, your needle coming down. Make sure it's bumping up snug against it. And then you will end up like this, so you've machined it. Then you turn it over and you would trim down your waist, because you don't want it too deep. And then with the edge of the bias binding, tuck it under, pin it in place, and then you can slip stitch. So make sure that it's not buckling, you've got a good turn, and it doesn't buckle. So it's not like doubled up anywhere underneath. So remember what I was saying previously, if you don't have a decent turn, it's hard to get a really nice clean line. If you've just got a little tiny bit to turn like that, you'll start getting wibbly wobbly lines. So tuck it under, but just make sure it doesn't buckle underneath. And then you can come along and slip stitch this. So on a garment, this is one that's been done here, and it's been turned under and slip stitched. So this area here is straight, but then we'll go on to a curved area. So there's a little bit different way of treating it when it's on a curve. So I'll show you that next. So on the curved one, same thing. Fold your bias binding around your cord, pre-fold the beginning, and fold it so it's like shingle on the roof, and then you lay it on the front of your fabric, lay it down, pin it, and then come with your zipper foot and zipper along snugly against the cord. Then at this stage you can trim it down, so lift the longer bit up and then you're going to trim to this shorter bit underneath. And if your fabric's really thick, you can stagger that cut so this is slightly shorter than the next one, just a little bit, and then that softens the edge. In the calico, it's fine, you don't really need to do that. If you've already pre-cut a curve in it, just be careful of stretching it, but once you get that stitch in there, that stabilizes that curve. But before that, it's a little bit delicate, so don't pull it as you're doing it because you will stretch it out of shape. So here I've machined it snug against the piping cord. As you get to the end, I pre-folded it there, and as you get to the end and you get closer to where you need to pre-fold, then pre-fold. Because if you measure it, pre-fold, what you'll find once you stitch, it'll kind of grow a little bit and end up too long or sometimes too short. So get really close to it. You can stop, you can lift your needle up on your machine, pre-fold it, and then carry on. So next is I'm going to pull the longer part back and I'm going to trim. So once you've machined that, peel back the longer layer and you will start clipping out V's. And the reason for this is when you turn it, let me just clip just some straight ones. So using the tip and just going up to the stitch line. So you can see, and you turn it over, you get this, there's excess there because you've turned that curve, so that longer edge is longer than this edge here. So what you need, you cutting these V's out, is when you turn it, they come closer together. If you just did a straight cut, like here, you can see as they turn down, they overlap on top of each other. And that would add bulk. So on a convex curve, you need to cut, when you're turning it back, you need to cut out a V so it leaves space and you don't get the bulk of them, the two overlapping. And once you've done that, turn it under, pin it all in place and slip stitch. Yeah. So that's your curved, and then you get a nice little edge, finished edge, looks pretty. So that's piping on a curve. So piping on a corner, same thing. Fold your bias binding around your piping like a shingle on a roof. Hand tuck it. You can machine this, but if you machine it, make sure it's a little bit loose, because when you come to attach it to here, you want to bump up tight, so you don't want to see a secondary stitch peeping out. So I find just hand stitching as quick, and you don't have that problem. You can just pull the hand tuck. So you've got your bias binding, you lay it. I'm just laying it beside because I've already done it, machined it on. So you lay it down with the longer side at the top, on the top of your fabric, lay it down, stitch to that point, and then you can see if you try to go around the corner, it pulls up. So then you need to come along, just stitch to about here, leave your needle in, lift it up, and then get your scissors, and you know exactly where the clip is. Then you can clip it. Yeah, so this is that stage where it's being clipped, and then you can carry on with the rest of it along there. Then you need to turn it over. You can leave that side down. If you trim some of the bulk away and lift the longer bit up, and you can trim some of this away. And again, if you've got thick layers, stagger the 2 layers, but calico is fine. And then see, I'm turning this under. It's a little bit too much, so I don't want it folding back on itself, so I'm going to trim a little bit of that away as well. Turn it under. Pin it in place. And then this side, I've already trimmed some there away. And I'm going to turn it over, and I need to miter this corner. So I turn it under, so it's like kitty corner. Turned it under, tucked it under the seam allowance. And pinned it in place. So they're meeting. So then I would come along and slip stitch along here. You don't need to do that one. I just leave that one. And then you turn it over and you've got a piped corner. You see this a lot on cushion covers. You can do this on the front of your bodice, going around the corner, the point of the bodice, but you won't get a really sharp point. You get this kind of slightly rounded point. If you really want a sharp point, you would do it in two, one going that way and one that way, and stop them and overlap them and do it that way. So that's piping on a corner. So creating a rouleau. So it's pipe and cord covered in fabric. So it's a covered cord, which you can use to make all kinds of things. Decoration. You can do frogging, those buttons that are frogged. Lots of things you can do with it. So how you do that is you get a length of cord, double the length that you need, some bias binding, and at the top end you wrap your bias binding around it. And then you will come along and machine with a zipper foot on a number 2 stitch, snug up against the cord till you get to the bottom, and when you get to the bottom you slightly kick out like a skirt and then stitch across. So I've machined down on a number 2. I've kicked out in a little skirt. I've left my needle in, lifted my foot up and turned it, and then I'm gonna stitch across the cord. Make sure you get it secured into the cord. Like that. So this little skirt kicking out gives you some room to reverse the calico or silk, whatever you're using, to make the cord into a rouleau. So this is it after it's been machined. So you can see I've stitched along, kicked out, and then across. So make sure you secure it into the cord. And number 2 stitch. So you need to cut quite close, not too close that your fabric will fray and come apart. and cut the excess away from around the bottom. And then you hold the top of the cord with your left hand, or if you're left-handed, the right hand. And then gently, where you kicked out here, it gives you space to start the fabric. So if you gently pull it so it reverses over that. And once you get it going, then you can just pull it over like a sausage skin. And you've got your cord. So then you can come cut that off, fix the end with a little stitch, and then you can start decorating with it. So that's a rouleau. It's easier if you use like silk or satin, something slippy. Calico is a little bit tricky to get it going over that edge, but you can do it. It's quite, once you've got the hang of it, it's easy to do. The little trick is just that little skirt to give you room to reverse that first little bit, and then the rest of it just slides down. That's a rouleau for you.